Hello, this is Neal for this week's Railroader reading from the Garrett Public Library. Hopefully, you've had a fair to middling week, just as I have. This particular month, I have selected a nonfiction book by Diana Butler Bass titled Grateful: The Transformative Power of Giving Thanks. To better suit our need to start out and throughout, I'll lead up to the first excerpt from Chapter 5. Grateful together about her daughter's graduation at West Potomac Public High School that contains a diverse student body from multiple races and economic situations. As we waited for my daughter's class to enter the arena, I did not even recognize the languages being spoken around us, nor could I place much of the native dress worn by mothers, aunts, and grandmother. At first, I felt uncomfortable. My husband, perhaps sensing this, said, "Notice, almost every group that cheers is an immigrant family. I bet their children are the first to graduate from an American school." He went on, "For some of these folks, the students might be the very first to ever go so far in school. That's the whole reason they came here. They're noisy because they are so grateful." Although we certainly could not survey every family from where we were sitting, it appeared he was right. We were not just at a graduation. We were sitting in an arena of Thanksgiving, where hundreds of people were feeling grateful together. Some were thankful a son or daughter did well and anticipated the new adventure of college ahead. Gratitude is social. On November 22nd, 2015, Pastor Jason McKelly stood in the pulpit at Aldersgate United Methodist Church in Alexandria, Virginia, and preached a sermon on gratitude. It was right before Thanksgiving, and it was the church's stewardship season, a time when congregations are urged to consider gifts and generosity. In the autumn, a gratitude sermon was nothing out of the ordinary, but this was not an ordinary day. Jason, a 40-something father with young children, was preaching for the first time in nearly a year, since being diagnosed with and treated for a rare and incurable form of cancer. He was better, and the cancer was controlled, but as the congregation knew, he would have to do chemo every 2 months for the rest of his life. He stood in the pulpit, barely out of treatment, to preach a Thanksgiving sermon for his community. He began, "You all have done so much for us. You've fed us and prayed for us and with us. You've helped us with my medical bills, and you've sat with me in the hospital. You were there to catch me when I passed out in the chemo room, and you didn't bat an eye when I puked in your car." But he said, as much as he appreciated it, he actually hated all that help. "I've always been awful at receiving gifts." He admitted, "I hate feeling like I'm in another's debt. I was a guy who kept score, which means I didn't mind you being in my debt. I just didn't want to be in yours." But he learned something. Gratitude is not about repayment of debts. It is about relationships. Through his cancer, Jason discovered that courage and hope could not be summoned magically. Rather, strength and healing came through community. He spoke of the church's greatest gift to his family in crisis. "We can endure all things because you've been with us. You're with us. More so than all the stuff you've done for us. You've been with us." With no dry eye in the congregation, he continued, "It was kind of you to share my nightmare. It was kind of you to share in my pain and suffering. It was kind of you to share in Ollie's worry, in my boy's fears and anxiety. It was kind of you to make my cancer, our cancer, yours too. Thank you," he finished, "for being with me." Gratitude is social. It is about, as Pastor Jason learned, presence, participation, and partnership. It is about being with one another, in life together. It is the thread of nature and neighbor, the seemingly fragile strands of gifts and goodness that weave our lives together. Breaking down walls. A few months after a white supremacist walked into Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and killed 9 people, I stood outside the building at the makeshift memorial to the victims. As I stared at the flowers and letters marking this sad and sacred place, contemplating the legacy of slavery and the evil of racism, I caught sight of 2 African American men at the periphery. With flowers in hand, they were waiting to approach the wall. I stepped aside to make way for them. After a few minutes of quiet reflection, the men attempted to take a selfie in front of the church. They were not very good at it. "Would you like me to take your picture?" I asked. "Yes, please," one responded as he handed me his cell phone. I snapped their picture, making sure that the photos had turned out well. I had done so with a reverence I hoped that was appropriate to the moment. I held out the phone to return it to its owner, but not before he said, "We came a long way to be here. Thank you so much." I replied, "I'm so sorry. It is the least I can do. It was awful. Just, I'm so sorry." My voice broke a little. Instead of reaching for the phone, the man reached toward me and gave me a hug. One of those side-by-side hugs, sometimes offered by strangers. Together, we stood at the wall in a companionable silence that seemed to mix grief and gratitude. For a moment, another sort of wall, the wall of human division, at least cracked and let grace through. He turned, as did his friend. They both shook my hand, and we parted ways. I felt grateful to have been there, grateful for their presence. The hugs and their willingness to share their silence seemed like a gift. Reaching beyond ourselves comes naturally when we are grateful. Gratitude can trigger the need for physical contact, writes one research team. They continue. The opposite seems to be true. Being hugged can trigger feelings of gratitude. In their work, they demonstrated that friendly and non-competitive touch fostered warmth and relationship, and thereby increased experiences of gratitude. In Western societies, more people than ever live alone. In some European and North American cities, the number of single-person households nears 60%, and social isolation tripled in the first years of the 21st century. Has social isolation also created an erosion of public gratitude? Although gratitude has had a bit of a revival in recent years, the longer view is helpful. Use of the words gratitude and thanksgiving reached a peak around 1820 and steadily declined to a low around 2000, with similar patterns for grateful and thankful. Beginning around 2000, however, something else began to occur. We started using the word gratitude again. Not nearly as much as in the past, but there was an uptick of use nevertheless. Games and gratitude. During the summer of 2016, baseball fans watched with a sense of astonishment as the Chicago Cubs won the World Series. Even if you were not a Cubs fan, it was hard not to appreciate the sheer magnitude of sports history that unfolded in 7 nail-biting games. After 108 years of losing, the Cubs broke the fabled curse of the Billy Goat, beat the Cleveland Indians, and reigned as baseball's champions. The final game of the series was not played in Chicago, but in Cleveland. Thousands of Cub fans gathered outside Chicago's Wrigley Field to share the game together. With the final out, the stadium's scoreboard lit up, "Cubs win." Fireworks above the park turned the night into blazing joy. Thousands of fans who gathered outside the park sang, hugged, cheered, kissed, and cried. Grown men and women wept, reported the Chicago Tribune. Fireworks lit up the sky in both the city and suburbs, while school-aged children gathered on sidewalks long after bedtime to cheer honking cars. This is what it looks like when a 108-year-old dream is finally realized. People took to the streets with a celebration 3 generations in the making. It was, said one young fan on behalf of myriad others, the greatest night of my life. 2 days later, the team joined their fans on the streets. The city hosted a parade and a rally in Grant Park, and the jubilation continued, with as many as 5 million people lining streets and showing up at the event. A local television station reported, Cubs World Series celebration ranks as the seventh largest gathering in human history, positioning the Chicago victory party between the Pope's 2015 visit to the Philippines and 1970 funeral of Egypt's President Nasser in historic magnitude. The more restrained Chicago Tribune also said the crowds were large, but the numbers may have been exaggerated due to runaway enthusiasm. In the months following the victory, there were fewer people dancing in Chicago streets, but enthusiasm did not abate. The celebrations gave way to another form of communal bonding, gratitude. As the Washington Post reported, the Cubs players and staff have grown accustomed to a strange phenomenon. Everywhere they go, people come up to them with stories of a late father, a grandfather, a mother, a grandmother, a brother, or a sister who was the biggest Cubs fan of them all. The World Series title would have meant so much to them. Almost uniformly, the interaction ends with 2 words. Thank you. It's a lot of gratitude, says Cubs manager Joe Maddon. It's the same refrain from everybody. For the most part, they don't want an autograph or a picture. They just want to shake your hand and say thank you. Thank you for joining me this week, and I hope you have a good one for next week's selection. Since this is the month for Veterans Day, I would firstly like to thank all our U.S. veterans, present and past, which may include some of you here. On a personal note, I would like to give thanks to my siblings, Big Sis Cindy, and my brothers Ron, Den, and Kevin, for being there for me, and I'm certain all of us inherited this love and support from our parents, Calvin and Joanne. I'll give a final gobble gobble and out until the next time we virtually meet.